Welcome to our YouTube video series on employee payroll and employment law. My name is Christopher Neufeld of Neufeld Legal. And in this particular video, we're going to be discussing why your payroll could very well be wrong and how Alberta hourly employee payroll should be calculated. Now, it's very easy to simply take a computer payroll program that was designed for another jurisdiction, be it in the United States of America or another Canadian province, and believe that it will satisfy the statutory requirements of the Alberta Employment Standards Code. However, unless it's specifically designed for Alberta's unique employment standards legislation from the ground up, you are most likely going to run into serious problems in our professional estimation, which are most evident in the failure to meet the reporting requirements, but more significantly result in computational errors that lead to employee underpayments. Naturally, most employers with Alberta-based employees and their legal counsel are not necessarily going to like what I'm saying. Nevertheless, all that we are doing is following the logic of the Alberta Employment Standards Code. Just as there is an order of operations for purposes of calculating mathematical problems, there is an order of operations that is set out in the Alberta Employment Standards Code when it comes to computing an employee's pay, and is highly specific to the province of Alberta. Even though far too many employers and their payroll advisors have failed to identify this payroll order of operations and implement it into their employee payroll processes. Now, there are a number of critical provisions within the Alberta Employment Standards Code that you might wish to reference as we are going through this video, as they are absolutely critical for understanding what we are talking about. For purposes of employee payroll reporting, you need to be looking at subsections 14 sub 1 and sub 2, together with a definition of earnings set out at paragraph 1 sub j. With respect to the computation of employee pay, you need to consider those reporting requirements and proceed to the definition of wages in paragraph 1 sub x and the definition of wage rate in paragraph 1 sub y. We also need to be looking at the statutory minimum for overtime pay in subsection 22 sub 1. As for general holiday pay, we would necessarily proceed to section 24.1. And for purposes of vacation pay, we would need to look at section 34.1 or 34.2, while also considering the application of section 43 that increases the calculation as being undertaken pursuant to section 34.1 or 34.2. Based upon our analysis of the Alberta Employment Standards Code and how it is intended to operate, our first step will be to set out the number of regular hours and overtime hours that was worked by the particular employee in the prescribed pay period. Having settled the number of hours that the employee worked, one then proceeds to calculate regular hourly pay for that particular pay period, taking the number of regular hours worked and multiplying it by the agreed upon base hourly rate. And once this is completed, we now see that what is in fact a deviation from payroll systems outside of Alberta, in that we need to undertake a calculation of wages, because wages and wage rate are the prerequisites for the remaining computations. They must also be explicitly calculated and reported on the employee's pay statement, which is all too often not done. With that being said, we need to calculate wages in accordance with paragraph 1 sub x of the Alberta Employment Standards Code, which isn't limited to an employee's hourly pay, but also includes permissible bonuses, incentives, premiums, allowances, and employer contributions, including but not limited to employer contributions to pensions, RSPs, medical, dental, and other insurance plans. In Alberta, especially for hourly employees working in the oil patch, these amounts can be quite significant and can be discerned from their current employee pay statements as well as other employer-provided employment documents. We should also note from the definition of wages that overtime pay, general holiday pay, and vacation pay are specifically excluded from the computation of wages. such that those amounts have no influence upon wages and need not be undertaken prior to the computation of wages. Once wages have been calculated, it needs to be set out on the employee pay statement. And once we have that number, we can compute wage rate by taking the amount of wages for the pay period and dividing it by the number of regular hours worked in the pay period. And just as those numbers are to be set out on the employee's pay statement, so too must the employee's wage rate for the pay period. Having followed these steps, which is consistent with the Alberta Employment Standards Code, we now proceed to confirm what the employee's statutory minimum for overtime pay needs to be. And for this, we need to look at two numbers that we have already established: overtime hours and wage rate. Taking those numbers and applying them to Section 22.1 of the Alberta Employment Standards Code, the statutory minimum for overtime pay will be 1.5 times wage rate times overtime hours. And if an employee's wage rate was higher than the employee's base hourly rate, which is the case in most circumstances, we see how overtime pay is being miscalculated and hourly employees are being underpaid on their overtime pay in contravention of the Alberta Employment Standards Code. Moving to general holiday pay, we see that this is based on average daily wage, which again is based upon one's computation of wages. These computations should be relatively easy to undertake with computer algorithms that can easily process these computations. But what this is not going to be is merely the employee's standard hourly pay for a single workday, unless that employee is receiving nothing further in the way of other wage components, be it permissible bonuses, incentives, premiums, allowances, and/or employer contributions, which is highly unlikely. Meanwhile, where an hourly employee works on a general holiday, consideration also needs to factor in the aspects previously raised with respect to overtime pay. As such, if an employee's wages are more than their base hourly pay, which is the case in most circumstances, we see how general holiday pay is being miscalculated and hourly employees are being underpaid on their general holiday pay in contravention of the Alberta Employment Standards Code. When we look at vacation pay, we need to follow a comparable process to that of general holiday pay. Although instead of computing an average daily wage, we are looking at the computation of vacation pay based on monthly or annual wages. But there is an added dimension to this process, since even though wages are exclusive of vacation pay, for purposes of calculating vacation pay after the first year of employment, the employer must include the prior year's vacation pay into its computation of the present year's vacation pay, such that this further augments the resulting vacation pay computation. Calculating the statutory minimum for vacation pay is relatively straightforward if undertaken in furtherance of the prior actions that were previously set out for computing wages through the course of the current year, together with vacation pay that was paid in the prior year. If we undertake the computations set out above, one would compute overtime pay, general holiday pay, as well as general holiday pay while working, and vacation pay in accordance with the Alberta Employment Standards Code, and determine whether or not the employer has satisfied the statutory minimums for the province of Alberta. To show how this mistake is evident with an Alberta hourly employee, if that employee works 8 hours every day with the exception of their general holidays and their statutory vacation days, 10 vacation days for the first 5 years, then 15 vacation days, and that employee receives some form of remuneration beyond their base hourly pay, be it permissible bonuses, incentives, premiums, allowances, and/or employer contributions, we nevertheless see those hourly employees receiving the same rate for all payments, subject to overtime and working on general holidays being subject to a multiple of 1.5. Such that the base hourly rate also serves the general holiday pay rate and the vacation pay rate, while the base hourly rate multiplied by 1.5 serves as the overtime pay rate and the general holiday working pay rate. However, as soon as we have additional wage components beyond the employee's hourly pay, the general holiday pay rate and the vacation pay rate will be higher than the base hourly rate, and the overtime pay rate and the general holiday pay rate will be higher than the base hourly rate multiplied by 1.5. Furthermore, after the first year of employment, the vacation pay rate would be higher than the general holiday pay rate because of the inclusion of the prior year's vacation pay in the computation of the current year's vacation pay. Nevertheless, all too often, what one will observe is an employee's base hourly rate, general holiday pay rate, and vacation pay rate all the same, even though this is not possible for the reasons previously set out. It can only occur in the first year of employment where the employee received no remuneration other than hourly pay, and after the first year of employment becomes statutorily impossible if the employee is only receiving the statutory minimum number of vacation days. Now, there might be people that disagree with what I have set forth. However, our approach is based entirely on the Alberta Employment Standards Code and concurrently conforming with all its constituent requirements, which we strongly believe is what is achieved by taking this particular approach. Meanwhile, if you simply import another jurisdiction's payroll system into Alberta, what you get in our professional estimation are far too many inconsistencies that cannot be simply glossed over. This is a clear process that is created by the Alberta Employment Standards Code, such that building a payroll state system from the ground up that is specific to the jurisdiction is the only way to effect compliance with the reporting obligations and the statutory minimums. Where employers have done otherwise or permitted payroll service providers to import their non-compliant payroll software into Alberta, those employers have operated at considerable risk of being in contravention of the statutory requirements for reporting and computations pursuant to the Alberta Employment Standards Code. The code would appear to be quite clear as to how the payroll process is intended to work, and unfortunately, it would appear that far too many employers are not adhering to that payroll process with respect to their Alberta-based employees. Thank you.